I'm going to show you how to get your starter active when somebody just gives you a tiny bit of starter. Maybe you got it in the mail or someone gave you some. It might be a little old by the time you get it. It might not have a lot of bubbles in it. Here. That one has a couple bubbles in it, but it hasn't been fed in about 4 days. But you don't even need this much. You could just have like a tablespoon and that would be enough to feed your starter. But you gotta feed it by weight is the best way. So I'm gonna take a nice clean container. Plastic is good. Some people say don't use metal. Don't use metal containers or utensils to stir it with. A lot of videos out there, you see them stirring with a metal spoon and it seems to work fine. I tend to not, but just to err on the side of caution. You can work in grams or whatever. I'm gonna work in grams, so I zero it. So I'm at 0 now, and I wanna see how much starter I actually have here. If there's a little bit of liquidy goo on the top, you can give it a sniff. If it's too black, you might wanna dump it out. If it just has a little grayish tinge to it, you can stir it in, it doesn't really matter. Then you just dump it in to see how much it weighs. It might not be exactly this consistency. You might find it's a little more liquidy or a little less liquidy. That's okay. All right, so I have 50 grams, and I'm going to stick with that because that's an easy number to cut in half. So I have 50 grams there. I'm going to zero it, and now I'm going to double it. So that's half flour, half water. So it's 50 grams of starter. So I'm going to add 25 grams of flour and 25 grams of water. This is white bread flour, which tends to give people the best results, but eventually you can start using rye flour, whole wheat. There's a lot of different videos out there if you want to see it, but this is just Robin Hood white bread flour. So I want 25 grams of that. 25. I'm using a metal spoon, but it's not actually touching the starter, so I'm always okay with just using it to scoop flour in. That's totally fine. Okay. I made some starter that was using spring water before. I'm doing a little test. You can use your own tap water. Different waters might not have a very good result with your starter. So I'm actually taking the starter I have. I divided it in half, and I'm using spring water in one, and I'm going to use tap water in the other, just to see what kind of results I get, like a little science experiment. Okay, so I'm going to zero that again. I'm going to go with some water. We'll see what tap water does. If you're nervous that you're going to over pour, you might want to pour this in something else first, but I'm just going to wing it. So I want 25 grams. Oops, and I over poured. There's 26 in there, but that's okay. Okay. Might want a smaller spatula to stir in a little tiny thing, but now you just stir it up. You want to make sure all the flour is hydrated. A littler spoon would have been easier. And you want to make sure that it's in a container that's big enough for it to double or even get 3 times the size. Do not use a container that has like a locking lid on it, because you can make it explode and then it will go all over the place. So I use a Rubbermaid container so that if it does get too big, the lid will just pop off and still make a mess, but at least I won't have glass shards everywhere. So it's getting pretty hydrated. I don't have any dry flour lumps in there. You don't have to be too crazy. Again, it might look, that's what mine looks like. It's okay if it looks a little more liquidy or a little less liquidy. This starter has always been fed with white bread flour. So it might look something like that consistency. I think I got all the dry flour bits out. Okay, I'm going to scrape down the sides so I don't end up with any crusty bits. Some people say never wash your container. I wash my container and go to a different one when it starts to get a little crusty. Okay, Scrape down my sides a little bit. So you don't really see any bubbles at this point, and that's absolutely okay. You want to make sure it doesn't get dried out, so don't leave it sitting on the counter like that, or you're going to have a crust on top, which is not a good thing. Then just seal it. If you want to see if you're not really sure how much you had in there, you can put a piece of tape so that it indicates the top, and then you really know when it's doubled or even a little bit more than doubled. You can also take a look at it, and if it's got lots of bubbles, that's good. And when you tap the side, a couple bubbles should pop. That's at perfect time to refeed it again. At this stage, you can refeed it once a day, twice a day. Just take a look at it every few hours. It totally depends on the temperature of the water that you use, the temperature of the flour, the temperature of your room. If it's going to take anywhere from 2 to 3 hours or 4 to 5 hours to double, maybe even longer if your room's really cold. You could set it on a heating pad or something like that, but it'll eventually double if it's active. If you don't see any bubbles, that's okay, but we'll go from there. So that's first feed. After about 4 days of not being fed, I'm gonna just put the lid on that, leave it sit at room temperature. It won't rise if you put it in the fridge, and just check on it in 3, 4, 5 hours and see if it's doubled. Okay.